He was face down in sunburned grass, and she couldn't scream anymore. Her hands were stretched up on a rough fence post, and her wrists were raw from fighting. A barefoot girl in a torn white dress stared at the dirt and tasted blood and dust. Behind her, a gray-bearded rancher knelt close, and his hands worked at her upper thigh. His Colt single-action army sat within reach, and the hammer looked half-cocked. If she kicked again, he could snap her leg, or he could do something far worse. She didn't know his name. She only knew she was trapped on his land. Her throat burned with heat, and her vision kept sliding into black. So she gathered what little life she had left, and she hissed one promise. "You do it. I swear I'll kill you." And if he'd been the kind of man she feared, she wouldn't have been breathing a minute later. If you like true frontier tales, subscribe now and ride with me again. This one's for the old boys who still remember when a man's word had weight. You doing all right today, friend? This story's been gathered from old accounts and told again with care, for meaning and for grit. I've added a few small turns so the lesson lands clearer and the ride hits harder. The pictures you'll see are AI made and to help you feel the heat, the fear, the dust. If that's not your kind of fire, no hard feelings. Take care of yourself. If it is, stay close, because it turns fast. Either way, leave me a comment and tell me what kind of story you want next, because the truth is, this one starts with a misunderstanding so ugly, most men would walk away and never look back. And if Elias Mercer had done that, Claire would have died before noon, and nobody would have ever known her name. That is how the frontier erased people. Not always with bullets, but with silence. So keep one thing in mind as we ride into this. The worst moment is not always the truest moment. Sometimes it is just fear talking, and fear is a liar that sounds convincing. Now let me take you back to summer in Kansas, and a road that chewed people up. It was 1892 near Dodge City, and the wind was hot enough to crack a man's lips. Out by the Cimarron country, water was money, and money was trouble. Elias Mercer knew that truth, and he'd lived it longer than most. He was 57, and he looked older, because solitude does that to you. He ran a quiet spread, kept his fences tight, and kept his mind even tighter. Folks called him sharp, and they didn't mean his tongue. They meant his judgment. He didn't drink much in town, he didn't gamble, and he didn't chase noise. He had a way of seeing 3 moves ahead, and that's why he was still breathing. That afternoon, Elias was riding his south line and checking the stock water. The sun sat high, and every insect sounded like it wanted to fight. He stopped at a small corral post and listened for anything that didn't belong. He heard it then, a weak scrape in the grass, and a breath like a dying calf. When he pushed through the weeds, he found her, half-conscious and shaking. She was young, maybe 22, and her skin had gone pale under the dirt. Her lips were split, her hair was tangled, and her eyes couldn't hold focus. The worst part was the smell, that dry sickness smell of someone past their limit. Elias didn't think romance. He didn't think trouble. He thought numbers and minutes. A body can only lose so much water before the mind starts snapping like rope. He poured a little from his canteen, and he wet her mouth slow. She coughed and swallowed and tried to push away like a cornered cat. When she moved, the dress pulled tight at her leg, and Elias saw the stain high on her upper thigh. There was a torn patch of cloth, and blood had dried in layers. Not a clean cut, but a ragged rip, like wood or wire had taken a bite. If that wound got packed with dirt, she'd fever, and she'd be gone in days. He looked around, and he saw no wagon, no horse, and no tracks that made sense. He saw only a long drag mark and a few broken stems pointing east. That told him she'd crawled, and it told him she'd been desperate. Elias had seen desperate before, and it never showed up alone. He lifted her under the arms and pulled her into the thin shade of the post. Her legs buckled, and she tried to swing at him, but she barely had strength. He spoke low, because loud words make fear grow teeth. "Easy now, miss. You're safe for the moment, and I'm not here to harm you." She didn't believe a syllable, and her eyes cut to the gun on his hip. Her hand twitched, and Elias saw the intention. Even through her dizziness, that's when he made the choice. That would brand him a villain in her mind. He guided her hands up to the post, and he looped a soft rope around her wrists. It wasn't a hanging knot. It was a holding wrap, meant to keep her from falling. He needed her steady, because one wild jerk could tear that thigh wound wider. He needed both his hands free, because blood and heat don't wait on manners. The moment the rope touched her skin, she snapped awake with terror. She arched hard and tried to twist away, and pain flashed across her face. To her, it didn't look like rescue. It looked like a man taking advantage. She spat dust, and she forced the words out like a curse. "You do it. I swear I'll kill you." Elias didn't flinch, because he'd heard worse from better people. He just nodded once, like a man accepting bad weather. "Go on and hate me later, miss, but hold still right now, or you'll bleed." Then he set his hat brim low, and he got to work, quick and clean. He cut away the torn cloth, and he rinsed the wound with the last safe water. He used a strip from his own bandana, and he pressed it firm. He didn't linger, he didn't leer, and he didn't say a single pretty thing. All he did was save a life, in the ugliest minute of it. Clara Mayfield, that was her name, though Elias didn't know it yet. All he knew was her breathing steadied and her shaking slowed to a tremble. Her anger stayed bright, because anger is warmer than fear in that kind of heat. She kept her eyes on his hands, and she watched for any wrong move. And then the wind shifted, and it carried a different kind of warning. Beyond the fence line, a thin ribbon of dust rose on the trail, and it was moving fast. Elias looked once, and his face tightened, because he knew what riders meant. As Clara sagged against the post, a small scrap of paper slipped from her dress seam. It fluttered and landed near Elias's knee, and he saw 2 words clear as daylight. "Dodge City." Elias picked it up, and he didn't read more than that. He didn't need to, because men don't chase paper unless it's worth killing for. He glanced at Clara, and she stared back. Still tied, still furious, still alive. "So tell me this, friend, when those riders arrive, who do you think they'll shoot first?" Because Elias already knew the answer. And it was not the one Clara would expect. Elias didn't untie her right away, not because he enjoyed the power, but because panic can turn a saved life into a dead one real fast. He waited until her breathing slowed, until the shake in her shoulders eased into something he could work with. The riders were still far off, just a thin dust scar on the horizon, but they were coming with purpose. Nobody rides that hard in summer unless they're hunting something worth the sweat. He loosened the rope first, just enough so her hands could slide down the post. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect it. Instead, she slumped, kept her eyes on him, and tested her leg like a wounded animal tests ground. Pain flashed across her face, sharp and honest. That told Elias he'd done the right thing, and just in time, he helped her sit in the shade. Back against the post, he handed her the canteen again, slow and careful. She drank like someone who'd been bargaining with death all morning. Most folks talk too much after that kind of scare. She didn't. She watched him like he was still a threat that might wake up again. The dust line grew thicker. Elias counted riders by the way the cloud moved. At least 3, maybe 4. Too many for coincidence. Too focused to be lost hands. He made a decision, the kind he'd made his whole life without ceremony. He swung up into the saddle and brought the horse around close. He didn't grab her, didn't rush her. He just crouched and offered his shoulder like a fence rail. It took her a moment, but she leaned on him, then let him lift her. She was lighter than she looked, and that bothered him. Light usually meant hungry or running too long. They rode east, not toward his house, but toward Dodge City. He kept to low ground, cut behind scrub and shallow draws. He didn't talk much, because talk wastes breath, and breath was still precious for her. When she did speak, her voice was rough but steady enough. She asked where he was taking her. He told her Dodge City. She stiffened at that, like the word itself had teeth. That told him something else he didn't like. They stopped once near dry creek bed. He checked the bandage again, firm but clean. She winced but didn't pull away. That was progress. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in when nothing bad happens for a while. By the time the edge of Dodge City showed itself, the sun was sliding lower, but the heat hadn't let go. The town looked like it always did. Dust. Noise. Men pretending they had nowhere else to be. Elias guided them in careful, like a man bringing trouble on a short leash. He took her to a small doctor's office near the edge of things, the kind that smelled like alcohol and resignation. The doctor didn't ask many questions, which was good. He cleaned the wound proper, nodded once, and said she'd keep the leg if she rested. Rest sounded like a joke in that town. Outside, Dodge City breathed around them. The air tasted like horse sweat and flour dust. And every boardwalk creak sounded like somebody deciding to follow. A wagon rattled past. A pair of men laughed too loud near a saloon door. Everything looked normal. And that's what made Elias uneasy. Normal is often just quiet before shouting. She sat on a crate while he paid the doctor. When he turned back, she was gripping the edge like she might bolt again. He told her she was free to go. He meant it. That surprised her more than anything else he'd done. That's when the trouble found them. It started small. A man brushed past too close. Another slowed his walk to listen. Eyes lingered. Elias caught the look, the one that says someone's already decided what you're worth. It broke fast. One of Silas Crow's boys made the mistake of grabbing her arm. Elias moved without thinking, because thinking is slow. He twisted the wrist, used the man's weight, and dropped him hard. No flourish, no speech, just a lesson delivered clean. And then he stopped. Because he wasn't trying to win a street war. He was trying to leave town alive. He didn't chase anyone. He didn't swing again. He just put the gun in their mind and the calm in his own face. That's what age gives you. Not more strength, but fewer mistakes. Another came in swinging. Elias stepped inside the punch and drove a shoulder into the ribs. The sound wasn't pretty. Crowds love ugly sounds. A third man reached for steel and thought better of it when Elias's hand settled on his Colt. Not drawn. Just resting there, calm as a hand on a fence post. The crowd backed off. Not because they'd grown decent, but because they'd done the math. Clara stared at Elias like she was seeing him for the first time. Not as a threat, not as a savior. As something harder to name. A young deputy lingered nearby, eyes sharp, jaw tight. He didn't step in, but he didn't walk away either. When Elias met his gaze, the deputy gave a small shake of the head. A warning, quiet and real. Elias filed it away. They moved on, deeper into town. Elias knew they couldn't stay. Too many eyes now. Too many stories starting to form. And stories in Dodge City travel faster than bullets. As they walked, Clara finally spoke again. She asked him why he helped her. He told her the truth, or enough of it. Because leaving her would have sat wrong with him. Because some lines you don't cross, even when no one's watching. She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tight. Fear doesn't leave all at once either. That night, as they planned how to slip out before morning, Elias knew one thing for sure. Those riders hadn't been the last of it. Whatever she was carrying, whatever had brought her crawling into his land, it had teeth, and it was gonna bite again. And here's what worried Elias more than the men in town. Clara had no horse, no wagon, no saddle marks on her hands. A young woman does not cross Kansas summer on bare feet unless something went wrong fast. That meant one of two things. Either she escaped a bad situation and left everything behind, or someone wanted her found on foot, exhausted, easy to control. Elias had seen men like that before. Not gunmen, not outlaws in black hats, just tidy men with clean shirts and dirty paperwork. If you're still with me, you might want to settle in. Hit that subscribe button if these old frontier stories speak to you. Pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee, take a breath, and tell me this. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you listening from? They didn't stay in Dodge City long after that. Elias knew the rhythm of a town like that. First come the looks, then the whispers, then someone decides to be brave on borrowed confidence. He'd seen it 100 times, and he had no wish to be there for the next verse. They took a room on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a place where the walls were thin and the door locked. Clara sat on the bed and eased her leg out straight, jaw tight as she tested it again. The wound held, but pain has a way of reminding you who's in charge. Elias poured water into a tin cup and set it within her reach. He kept his distance, not out of fear, but out of respect. Night crept in slow. Dodge City never really sleeps. It just changes tone. Laughter turns rougher. Footsteps grow heavier, and promises get made that no one plans to keep. Elias sat by the window, hat on his knee, listening. Clara broke the silence first, not with a confession, not yet, just a question about how long he'd lived out here alone. He told her long enough to know better than to ask strangers why they run. She almost smiled at that, almost, later. When the sounds outside thinned, she finally reached into the lining of her dress. Slow, careful, like she expected him to stop her. He didn't. She laid the folded papers on the small table between them. Not many pages, but thick, the kind that had been handled too much and hidden too often. Elias didn't touch them at first. Paper like that carries weight, and not just in ink. She told him just enough. The land near the Cimarron, the water rights that fed more than one small ranch, the way men like Silas Crow circled places like that, patient as buzzards. Her father had tried to keep things clean, tried to document what belonged to who. That kind of man doesn't last long when money gets nervous. Elias listened without interrupting. He knew those stretches of river. He knew how a single bend could decide who lived easy and who packed up. He also knew that paper didn't scare men like Silas, unless it could actually hurt them. When she finished, the room felt smaller. Elias finally picked up the pages and read. Not every word, just enough to understand why writers were chasing her hard enough to cook themselves alive. This wasn't about theft, it was about leverage. Elias had learned a long time ago that leverage is what ruins good people. A man can survive a fight, but a lie on paper can follow him for years. Clara did not have to say the name Silas Crow for Elias to picture him. A man who never sweats because other men do his sweating. A man who would rather buy a witness than face a judge. And that is why Elias felt the old anger rise. Not the hot anger of youth, the cold anger that comes with memory. He told her he couldn't promise safety. He told her he wasn't a lawman, and he wasn't a hero. What he didn't say was that he'd already decided not to walk away. Some choices get made quiet long before they reach the mouth. They planned to leave before sunrise. Stay off the main road. Follow the Santa Fe Trail only where it bent away from eyes. Head toward the Cimarron, where the truth of those papers would mean something. Before dawn, Elias stepped out to check the street. That's when he saw the deputy again, the young one from earlier. The man didn't approach, didn't speak. He just leaned against a post and waited until Elias looked his way. The deputy tipped his head once and spoke low. He said there were men asking questions. He said not everyone wearing a badge was interested in answers. Then he added one more thing, quiet and sharp. If Elias took the east road, he'd better not take it slow. That was enough. Elias thanked him with a nod and went back inside. Clara saw his face and didn't need the details. She pulled on her boots without being told. They left Dodge City under a sky just starting to gray. The town watched them go without blinking. Elias kept them off the hard track, cutting through shallow draws and scrub. Clara rode behind him, holding steady, her weight lighter than it should have been. He adjusted pace without comment. Pain doesn't like being ignored, but sometimes it has to wait. By mid-morning, the heat returned with a vengeance. The land opened up, flat and honest. Elias felt exposed, like a man walking with a target painted on his back. He checked behind them often, counting dust, reading distance. They stopped near a dry creek bed to rest the horse and check the bandage again. Clara held still while he worked. No threats this time.